This week we covered two chapters, action research and evaluation research. And my question, the discussion really just focused on the chapter on action research. So I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. Starting out with the quiz, you had quiz questions from both. You can see here that the average score was a 91. Had several, well, a couple of few 100s, but some of you may have missed one question, a standard deviation of 1.3. But there was one question in particular I want to highlight. You can see here through the discrimination index, most of you did pretty well. This question, only 70% of you got correct, and it was a question about in general action research is. And some of you responded that a rigorous research study published in refereed journals. No, they're not. They're typically practitioner-based. Action research is done for some sort of formative assessment, if you will, to inform our instructional practice, done by teachers, and it oftentimes does not reach a journal publication because it isn't a research study that it gets refereed and has this gold standard of experimental design. Rather, it is something in a case study, a small snapshot of what's going on in someone's classroom. So the response here should have been less rigorous than research studies published in refereed journals. However, you will see these publications about action research in publications produced by, for example, a CTE magazine, Techniques, or something like that. You may see a publication of somebody's case study or action research in a magazine type publication where it's not necessarily peer reviewed for scientific approach, but is reviewed for editorial purposes. So that was one where some of you kind of had a hit or miss. The rest of them you did pretty well. This was about systematic research, and you should have responded that that's gathering, recording information about one's professional practice in ordered ways. This is the one I'm going to spend a little bit of time on. Action science is a systematic approach for examining the differences between professional beliefs and their actual behaviors. This is really looking at that espoused theory and theory in action. Few of you said all of the above, but developing practical theories is really not part of that. And it's not really done in a scientifically rigorous manner, as I discussed above. So this was kind of a pretty good discrimination index. It really checked for some close reading in the two chapters, specifically the one on action research. And you did well on this question, 93, 95%, 97%. I'm going to get down here to the one where there was not so good. Here we are. I think this was question 11. Educational research and development, formative evaluation, and the response that I was looking for here can occur at any stage of the program development process. That's when you're doing a formative evaluation. But many of you answered is used primarily to decide whether a proposal for a new program should be moved into development. Well, truthfully, one could follow the other. And if you looked at the table 19.2 in the chapter, I could see how you would have interpreted this question as, yes, used primarily to make a decision about whether you have some sort of formative assessment about should we move forward or not. But really, I was looking for it. That can occur at any stage. So if you answered either of these two responses, you got it marked correct. And I will be making an adjustment for next time I give this quiz. So thank you very much. You all have Amy Norman to thank. She drew my attention out to this and provided a good reason by looking at the graphic to give enough evidence to me to go, yep, those two are really the same, in addition to the fact that so many of you responded that way. The rest of the quiz went off pretty well, and most of you did a really good job on the open response answers. Okay, so that's the quiz. Good work. Now I want to take a look and move to the discussion. Oh, and on that quiz, there was a question about in the steps for action research, which one do you feel like is the one that teachers have the most difficulty with, that would keep them from doing action research? And I said I'd respond to what was the winner here. And honestly, this one right here, step 3, analysis and interpretation of the data. In other words, I get this data. Is it descriptive? Is it a percentage? What's the frequency? How do I analyze these numbers? How do I make sense of what I gathered? And I think that's a pretty fair selection. The other one that I thought would be high, and really was high, was step 7, preparing a report for the findings, because I think that teachers are really just interested in finding out a solution to a problem. They fix it in their classroom, and they're not really too much caring about preparing a report, because there's really no recognition for that in many ways inside of schools. It's more, did my students perform as well as anybody else's students, and that's your measure, not the measure of did I prepare a report and some of my colleagues read it, which is quite different than the way we have in higher ed, where preparing a report or a research paper is the most important thing that we need to be able to do to share our results. So not too surprised. When you see an asterisk here, it was because there were some, not, I wouldn't say necessarily fence sitters, but people that thought there were, so when you total this, it's more than the 30 people in our class. But some people picked more than one step that they thought was a barrier to teachers doing action research in their class. And I put a quote here from Ty Smith because I was surprised by the big number here. I think it's a pretty good size number, taking action, that teachers would not take action. And some of you noted it, but your reasons didn't make as much sense to me because I'm figuring, wow, you've got all this invested in doing your project and you found this answer. Why wouldn't you take action? I mean, that's my modus operandi. Yes, I've got the answer. I'm going to move forward. But Ty made it clear to me. He said, in my opinion, the fifth step for taking action would be a barrier. The main reason I state this, it is in its definition. It requires the teacher to make changes to one's behavior and observe the consequences. Many of us don't like to make those changes. They take time and effort, and really moving from our a theory in action, that espouse theory to a theory in action. Anytime change that is involved in that way is a barrier, especially for teachers that have been doing many of the same things over and over again. Change can be a scary concept. Well, not just a scary concept, but do I really want to do this? This is taking a lot of effort. And I think that goes back to somewhat of a mindset about your profession and how you want to keep yourself fresh and moving forward and always trying to find the best methods. So for me, this like, yes, what's the best way? I'm not, I'm actually all about trying something new, especially if I've already done this research. I would just definitely move forward. But I can definitely see that there are folks who would just say, I'm good, and not want to move forward. So I thought that was a great explanation, Ty. Again, on question 11, everybody that marked the other response based on figure 19.2, I gave credit. All right, the discussion. As you read the synopsis of the action research studied in chapter 18, the Shilkus synopsis, and they were doing pauses in between each one, you note that the question for investigation was to explore teaching methods to activate students' multiple intelligences and to explore different ways to reach all students, including hard to motivate students. That was one of Shilkus's major things that he wanted to find out. And the second thing was that he wanted to demonstrate the contribution of industrial arts to students' intellectual development. Now, when I saw this statement, I was thinking about how I would measure that. And to my surprise, as I read the article, I'm like, I don't feel like I have a really good thought about how he really measured that. And many of you echoed that in your reflection posts. But based on his methods, data, and results, do you think that he achieved these two goals or answered questions? Most of you said yes to question 1, and a lot of you said no, probably more than 50% no to this section 2 here. So I want to share, almost like you would have in a debate, 2 points, two sides of to respond to these 2 questions by looking at a couple of your classmates' posts. Oh, by the way, I did find a direct link to the articles in the second edition of Teachers Doing Research. I'm going to post this link underneath this video. Let's see if I can open it up really quick. When you go to this link to see the Shilkus original publication, let me kind of squish in here, you'll see this cover here and when it was edited. But if you go over here and say, search this word, and then say view all, you'll see where it's mentioned. So here we go into, here it is, Racing to Research Inquiry for Middle School Industrial Arts. And luckily, in this Google book, we actually have the entire article. So if you want, some of you said we just didn't know enough. I would tell you that I didn't learn that much more here. In fact, the same quote that's in our text is here. But nonetheless, if you want to go back and kind of skim or scan, I did find where it was published. I wouldn't say the original research, but where they published this particular article in what seems to be not a peer-reviewed article or journal article at all, or even a book, but a book written by Gail Brunford, Joseph Fisher, and David Hobson. So I'll put that link in there if it helps you kind of rethink what you responded to in these 2 questions. All right, let's use Casey's first. She said, I do believe that Shilkus achieved his goals during this action research study. He utilized different teaching methods and learning activities to reach more students, thus applying the multiple intelligences framework. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this framework, I've also provided some links to kind of a quick overview of YouTube video about what this is, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. But the multiple intelligence framework was really what he said he was looking for. For example, the interpersonal intelligence was used by having students involved in cross-tutoring and peer tutoring. Kinesthetic was involved because they had an activity to design to make CO2 cars, and it was very hands-on, and most students enjoyed making them, making sketches and designs that relates to visual intelligences, etc. Through his different methods. Now, really, through his activities, maybe he had some different methods, Shilkus was able to appeal to various learning styles, which allowed him to reach even the hard to motivate students. Some other methods he used, such as having students keep journals, create compatible student pairings, continuous observation, and using formative assessments and surveys, allowed him to collect meaningful data to get good results. He also reported that many students would ask for additional work because they wanted to and enjoyed helping someone else. This shows that the methods and styles he incorporated tap into the students' intrinsic motivation and encourage their learning. She says methods here, but I'm gonna read Chris's post in a minute, and you get to decide: is he really doing multiple methods, or is he just using one type of method that's getting at different types of practices? And that's something that might be a bit of semantics, but good job on Casey's for pulling those kinds of things out of what she read from our text. Now, in the second question, she says, I think Shilkus was also able to demonstrate the contribution of industrial arts to students' intellectual and social development because the activity methods allowed more students to be actively engaged in the learning process through the tutoring and hands-on activities. Now, here's where I kind of think, is that enough to say to me that there was intellectual and social development? Several of you said no. The fact that he's doing these kinds of hands-on things, they were actively engaged, doesn't necessarily mean that there was intellectual growth. You didn't feel like there was a measurement for it at all. But she goes on to say the CO2 car learning activities were more engaging to students, so they were more excited and willing to participate. Yes, that gets at the motivation, I would believe. Shilkus remarked that presenting information in different manners has made it possible to reach more students, not just the students who excel in traditional classes. Now, this is where I was trying to understand what was meant here by traditional classes, traditional approaches to learning, like maybe a lecture quiz on Friday, kind of like what we have to do in these online courses, or actually having the hands-on kind of thing. It was really unclear to me what was meant by traditional classes. He encouraged collaboration among his veteran students and their trustees, and it helped and his tutees, and helped to promote their socialization skills, which in turn contribute to intellectual development. So Casey's making a little bit of a leap here, and she is defining intellectual development as socialization skills. And I think a lot of you interpret it as, no, I'm looking for some sort of academic achievement as a result of what was learned here. A CO2 car, did they understand pressure? Did they understand the scientific principles of engineering, so on and so forth? So again, without any definitions of these terms, you're kind of, as the reader, open to interpreting it yourself. And then let's flip to go to it's almost a pro-con approach here, what Chris said. She has some technical difficulties, but she said, Jacob, here's some more of what it was going to say and also answers your question. According to what is reported in our text, Shilkus used cross and peer tutoring as his method. So she's saying one method, not methods. Although it might activate different types of a preferred learning style, she's saying it's one method. He stated he wanted to explore teaching methods, but what is discussed in our text is only one method. He used journal entry as a form of gathering information and gave pre and post surveys, but those aren't methods. Those are means for him to gather data or information from his students. I'm not saying that this research wasn't valuable, but from my perspective, I don't think his initial focus was completely achieved. He indicates that through tutoring activities, he saw marked improvement in class participation and behavior. But does that mean he reached all of his students? In his original report, does he define reached? He reports also that his teaching activities using multiple intelligence framework allowed him to reach the hard to motivate kids and encourage more student socialization. Again, all good things, but in my opinion, incomplete information to conclude complete demonstration of the contribution of industrial arts to intellectual development. Do I personally believe that industrial arts does just that based on my own opinion, experience, and perspective? Absolutely. But do I think that it was written here in our textbook about Shilkus' study accomplished that? No. And I'd have to agree too. I think that most of you said, I really just don't have enough information. So if you want to go back to that article, you can see a bit more information. So on part 2 of that question, Shilkus also wanted to demonstrate the contribution of industrial arts to students' intellectual development. But he didn't really define what was the intellectual development he was looking for. What type of achievement was he expecting? Was it socialization? Was it just motivation to learn more? And how would motivation really contribute? There was really no metric for us talking about intellectual development. And I didn't see that in this article either. So those are some things to think about there. Based on his methods and data and results, do you think he has achieved these 2 goals or answered the questions? Now I'll let you decide a little bit more after you've read the 2 posts a little bit more closely. And by the way, Canvas was supposed to put you into groups, said it did, but in actuality, some sort of glitch didn't really happen. And so when I opened up and saw 109 responses to my post, I realized all of you were in one group. So I don't have to spend too much time going over anybody else's posts. Just pick those 2. I think if you could follow the discussion as you jumped in and saw, whoa, there's a lot of posts. Hopefully, I will double check to make sure buttons get clicked because it can be kind of distracting and take a lot of time to read everyone's posts. This was actually what was said in the text. Shilkus does not specifically mention his use of reflection in his report, but he gives many examples of how his thought processes changed during and after the action research project. For example, and this is his reflection, I've noticed changes in myself and my students as a result of this project. Presenting information in a different manner has made it possible to reach more students. We don't know what this means. Not just the students who excel in traditional classes. But what I think it means is that these reluctant learners were engaged. They felt valuable. So there's just some things here we got to read between the lines to try and understand exactly what it is in research. And I think a lot of you tried to do that without overstating or overstepping the data that we have. I can only hope that my students learn as much as I did during this project. But I really feel like he was looking at their ability to engage by the method that he used. He was crossing over to what Howard Gardner talks about as multiple intelligence and how others have interpreted that to be learning styles. Now, the jury is out about whether learning styles actually truly exist as a way of learning. And in fact, there's much research that says no. It's an approach. And most of you have had courses on differentiated instruction to reach different types of people with their preferred learning style or the way that I'll give you a good example. I like videos. I like to connect with videos. If I do a question on how do I go to YouTube, where my husband goes to the website. He just wants to read it and scan it quickly and gather the information he has. I want to see somewhat of a step-by-step. So I have a preferred method that I want to see that type of question answered. But Howard Gardner, Beyond Wit and Grit, Rethinking Keys to Success, produced pretty recently in 2015 an update about what he was talking about with learning style. So I posted that under this reflection as well, just to give you an understanding of what he's thinking. It kind of got convoluted between multiple intelligence and learning styles. And so also I have a post by Dr. Willingham in the University of Virginia. He's a neuroscientist. Those of you who have taken my adult ed class have already seen these videos. I think he has a lot of good comments about why they don't exist as an actual method of learning. They're not a theory of learning. Rather, they're a way to approach learning. And so I really encourage you to read, actually watch, because it's a video, one of my preferences, but to watch the video related to how his learning style video. So let me pull this up really quick. Well, there's the video on if you don't know what learning styles and multiple intelligence are. Here's theory integration. Keep in mind, this is from teacherspay.com. It's not jury. Teachers actually pay to download some of the lessons here. But it does, for those of you who are not familiar with learning styles, they're adapted from Howard Gardner, and they are here. So I put this quick video up for you. But back to Daniel Willingham. I've given you a link to his actual blog. And this first video, and he says, warning, production values are GarageBand quality. I would agree. But what he says here is quite meaningful. And I really encourage you to take a look at it. Here we are. Where did it go? I'll get there. Where he talks about whether you're an auditory or a visual learner. And if you're an auditory learner, how can you possibly explain to somebody who says, I'm an auditory learner, and you expect to tell them with their use of just their auditory or hearing the shape of a country in Africa. he's saying that just doesn't make sense that you would use just an auditory way um, for them to learn about the shape of a country. So learning styles don't exist. I think it's a really good thing for you to listen to after this reflection so that you understand that sometimes research shows that learning styles are a myth. And also then you can go back to his little blog post about what teachers tell him, and pretty much teachers are angry with him for saying this because they really believe that they do exist, and his responses to those. Highly encourage you. This is a learning moment. You're going to hear this a lot. I actually was in a session by a professor who they were actually graduate students who designed their course, their online course, around the idea of learning styles. And when they were presenting their paper in front of a group of professors, there were several educational professors who not only rolled their eyes, but actually got up and walked out of the session because they figured that these graduate students absolutely knew nothing about what learning styles were and what it meant for multiple intelligences. And it's based upon some of the things you're going to hear here from Daniel Willingham. So I highly encourage you to click on that link and watch that video. And then the link here, Beyond Wit and Grit, the Rethinking Keys to Success by Howard Gardner. That's also very helpful. So you have Dr. Willingham, the neuroscientist, talking about really saying learning styles don't exist, and he provides a lot of research. You have his blog. You have Learning Styles and Multiple Intelligence, Theory of Integration, from not a peer-reviewed source, theteacherspay.com, but it will give you a quick overview to what teachers oftentimes profess inside of class, inside of an educational setting. And then, of course, the Howard Gardner Beyond Wit and Grit, Rethinking the Keys to Success. So hopefully with these few resources here, and of course the link to the original Shilkus article, they kind of make some points of clarification. As I have mentioned before, my wrap-ups to your comments or our discussions to me are more valuable because it helps me to get into what you're thinking about the content. And rather than just like spewing on lecture after lecture week, I mean, I do an overview just to highlight some important things in my experience. But to me, this is where the real learning takes place. There's misconceptions that I can talk about here, and I can provide you with resources like these to get you to think a little bit more critically about the things that you hear sometimes in a faculty meeting or just in the halls with your peers or in the popular press about what you should be doing next as a teacher. So hopefully this is helpful to you, and I look forward to next week's discussion.